My name is Bob Meekum with Envision CADD, and I'll be kicking things off here in a little bit. If you guys notice, there's a conversation or chat with the Skype meeting here. We'll be utilizing that today for any questions. If you guys are having any audio trouble, you should be able to hear me right now. If you're not hearing me or hearing anything, just type away. Okay. Well, I'd like to get things going here. And again, my name is Bob Meekum with Envision CADD. I'm the project manager on the effort here to work on this consultant workspace. And Jen Jewett, who is the person you received the email from MDT, she's the project manager on the MDT side. We have two other individuals that will be helping us with the presentation today. From MDT, we got Thaddeus Lesnick with us. He was instrumental in helping us get this ready to go for you guys, the consultants. And also we have Rod Wing with Envision CADD. That is, he calls himself the mastermind behind the whole thing. So he's the one that will be doing the majority of the presentation for today. If you could do just a couple housekeeping items for us. If you could just make sure that your mics stay muted, we would appreciate that. If you do have any questions, please type it into the chat window, and we'll be answering those questions towards the end of our presentation. The presentation yesterday, it took about a half an hour, so depending on how many questions you guys have, we'll answer your questions at the end. If you do have any follow-up questions, or you get a chance to download and start working with it and have any comments or questions, please direct those to Jen Jewett at MDT. And then she will make sure that they go to the appropriate person to be addressed. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it off to Rod Wing, and he can get going on his presentation.
All right, well, thanks, Bob. Yeah, as Bob mentioned, I'm sort of the mastermind behind this madness of this new workspace. So if you have any issues with it and don't like it, you can throw your darts at me. For those of you who have worked with the current version or release or in previous iterations of the Montana DOT MicroStation Workspace, this should look fairly familiar to you. This is what you download currently from their website, and when you extract it, you get these folders. And they have a site.cfg where they want you to, where you can go and edit some of the variables and maybe change a few things around. But as we got to looking at this, they realized, and they'd heard comments that from the consultant community, that this was a little difficult to work with because things weren't organized like they were expecting to. They expected to have them in there. This MBT set this up for their internal use 25 to 30 years ago, and before a lot of these newer techniques for setting up workspaces and resources and things were kind of more well known. So this is what they came up with, and it's worked well for them, but they realized they'd need to make a change too. So that's when they asked us to assist with this. So we first thing we did was started taking a look at the workspace and where things were. In a typical MicroStation Bentley workspace structure, you'll have the workspace folder, and then you'll have different folders here for your standards and your users and your interface. And there are some things around here that do that, but they're just not in the right places, and maybe some things are scattered between folders where they shouldn't be. So what we did is we took this and then came up with more of a best practice kind of configuration, where we stuck to more of the Bentley structure, where we have the workspace folder like they do now, but then you have the folders like you're used to seeing in a standard sort of configuration from most other DOTs and other engineering firms, where you have the workspace and you have your interfaces where the interfaces go, projects where your PCFs go, users where the UCFs go, and also then the standards, which define where you keep your cell libraries and your DGN libraries and that kind of thing based in different folders. All right, so we kind of move things around and set things up that way to make things a little more standard. The standards file, this is just for MicroStation related configuration settings and resources. If you want to launch, if you launch GeoPack or Power GeoPack, it will also load these Open Roads standards files. So there's more DGN libraries just for Open Roads, and that those will load only when you launch Inroads, or I mean Power GeoPack or GeoPack. So we have those folders there. We have the configuration set up so that the USTN site configuration variable and that the site level points to this standards folder. So all of these configuration files get read in, and we've tried to set this up, and I think we've done all right here, that you shouldn't have to come in here and edit these. Maybe you can disable or remove some of these files that you might not need, but for the most part you shouldn't have to come in and change any variable settings in here if you want to redirect some things. So we'll get into the that in a little bit here of how to customize the install. All right, so speaking of the install, you will download, when it's available, you will download a zip file, similar to this one. This is sort of what our first release was supposed to be, but there's since been some updates to some line styles that MDT wants to get in that correct some issues. So there will be a v1.1 that will be available hopefully next week that you can download and start working with. But you'll download that, and then we have also the install instructions as a separate PDF that you'll be able to download and look to do the installation. And it's got some change, just the basic install instructions, and then some of the changes, and then customization. If you want to change where things go, that details how to do some of that. So that's all there for you. Oops, I had it on the wrong screen, so you can't see that. Now you should be able to see that. So we've got the install instructions, list of changes over what renamed some of the variables, and then customization if you want to move it different pieces around to different folders and then put it on a network drive. So we'll have those instructions available as part in the download. But when you when you download the zip file and unzip it, it'll want you, the instructions will say put it under C Montana_DOT. And if you look here in the path, if you just unzip it to the C drive, everything will go to Montana DOT and then workspace, workgroup, those kinds of places. So everything gets unzipped to just this one folder. And then if you want to take it, so use this as your location where you run the workspace from, then all you have to do is go to the workspace startup and copy the appropriate shortcut, whether you're running GeoPack, MicroStation, or Power GeoPack. Copy that shortcut to your desktop, and then just double click on it, and that will launch the Montana DOT workspace in that application. And it's taking a minute. And you'll still have the same user that you had, the MDT Open Roads, and then the various projects that load the right resources and make the right settings and their interfaces available that you had previously. And just like the current version, everything, all the DGNs go to the same DGN folder. And that was done just because that's the way Montana DOT works internally. Their document management system and their plotting system are all set to look to that folder for their DGN files. So out of the box, that's what you're given as well. But we can change that if you would like to. We'll go over that here. But when you get their workspace then and load this up, you get their custom menus and all of the level definitions and custom line styles. You'll get those, and cell libraries. All those things will get loaded up. And then if you're running just MicroStation, you won't get any of the civil variables, geopack variables defined. But if you run Power Geopack or Geopack, then it will define all of the civil resources and open roads resources that you need as well. So with the default installation, this workspace, Montana DOT Workspace is a UStation site level. So it looks here for projects and users and interfaces and your standards. It's also set to look to the Montana DOT DGN folder for all of your DGN files. And then the user prefs is where your user preference files go for that particular user. And we'll cover here in a few minutes how to change that. Oh, the other thing I wanted to note that now that we're in here, and let me bring this up again, is we also went through and looked at the macros and made changes, so that we took out maybe hard-coded paths and changed variable definitions and things so that more macros were available for you to run. So under MDT apps and under road tools, a lot of these things that didn't work for you before will now work. There are some that are not going to work, like DocuPlot. That's the internal Montana DOT printing solution application. That's not going to work for you outside of Montana DOT. But things like MDT maps, where you can pick one of these image files and attach it knows the right folder, go out and attach it, and you can use the raster attachments that are available to you. Okay, so some of these that didn't work before will work for you now. And so you can make use of some of their macros that come delivered now with the workspace. We also made the download smaller. Instead of being like 1.5 gigabytes, it's now about half the size. So that should help out as well. All right, so one of the things that we got sort of during our comment period is consultants want to change where these their MicroStation the files go. So you can move things around, and let's say we take that whole Montana DOT and we can move the workspace and work group. The work groups have to follow the workspace. And put that on here. We've got a W drive, W MicroStation Standards Montana DOT. So we could put that there, and then the user preferences may be in a different folder, and then the projects for the projects, we can make unique project folders out here as well. So we can put individual DGN files in those project folders. So the way you would do that is, like say, you make the folders on your network drive, in this case it's our W drive, and copy the folders wherever you want them to go. And then under the workspace startup folder, there's this MDT startup.cfg. And if we open this up, let me go back to the original one. I think it's delivered. All right, so in this is what comes delivered when you unzip the zip file. And you'll get this MDT startup config here. And we point the main path to Montana DOT, where we place our DGN files. That's the default place it's going to look for the DGNs, and there's the default place it's going to look for the user preferences. So that's how it comes out of the box, but we can change these. And so that's what we're doing here in this other file. We've copied it to our network folder. We've changed this now from C Montana DOT to W MicroStation Standards Montana DOT. And now that will tell the change the direction of that, or the location of that uStation site variable to look to this workspace folder on the W drive for our standards. Likewise with the DGN path, we can change this now so that it goes to not only the standard DGN folder, but we can put in this uStation project name variable name, and that will tell MicroStation to that expands to the name of the current project selected, and we'll look for a folder by that name. So by having PCFs that wrong window, by having PCFs with that name, it will expand I-15 bridge replacement, and it will look for a folder named I-15 bridge replacement for our DGN files. And that's why under the projects we made this folder, and it will look here for our design files. So just by changing out DGN for a uStation project name, we can make that change. Same thing with the user prefs. We change to where that goes, and if you put it on a network drive, you need to make sure that everybody has their own space for user preferences. You don't want users sharing the same UPF and preference settings, because that'll lead to all sorts of conflicts. So by changing just user prefs to the $ username variable, that tells MicroStation to look for the user's login name. So I've got that set up here under user preferences, Montana DOT, and I got my login name there. And then the other thing we did with the users, whether you keep it local or move it out, is we set up a place for users to have their own personal settings beyond their user preferences. Notice we made folders for cell libraries, DGN libraries, macros, and VBAs, so that it defaults so that if the user wants to create a new cell library, it makes a new cell library here. It gives them a personal cell library they can make their own cells in if they wish. Same with DGN libs. If they want to make their own toolboxes or things like that that might go in a DGN lib, they have their own personal DGN lib to work in, and it won't affect anybody else. And same with like VBAs. If they want to make their own VBA and record their own macros and things, they'll go here in their personal VBA folder, so they won't be messing up with the standard ones. So just by naming a folder with a username and copying that from the template, you'll get all this stuff. And as well as those places there, it's got their own, there's their own user preference file, personal function key menu, geocoordinate favorites, mouse buttons, AccuDraw shortcuts, and spell check dictionary. So that's all set up out of the box to have those things configured. So we can make a personal folder for everybody on a network drive just by changing that location to a network drive and putting each in a username folder. The other thing with the default Montana DOT workspace for consultants and the way they work internally is they kind of have everybody use the same user config file. And if you put that out on a network, maybe that's not such a good idea. And we streamlined that so there really isn't much in the UCF anymore. It's just kind of a blank file. So you can remap the users to have their own personal UCF file. And you just point this uStation user says where to find my user config file, and you can just point it to the same folder where the user prefs are and give it the name personal. Now the reason we went with the name personal here, two reasons. If you've got a lot of users to set up and maintain, all you have to want to do is copy the template and just rename it to the username of the person who's logging in, and then everything else, since it's got personal in there, will fall in place. If we named it with the user's username, you'd have to go and rename all of these to the actual username of the person, and that's a lot to maintain for a lot of users, a lot to set up. The other reason we went with personal is that's the new standard for MicroStation Connect and OpenRose Designer. When you go to those, the next release, everything is named personal out of the box, and you can't change the name of the personal UCF. It's configured to that, and there's no change in it. So that's the two reasons we went with personal. So by making that one change, you can set the UCF file to be set up here as well. So once you make that change to your new configuration file, or that single configuration file, you just have to update your shortcut then, go to the properties, and instead of having that look to C Montana DOT, you give it the path to your new network config, your startup config, and it will look there. It will read that. And now I can use my personal user config, and if I'm on the resurface project here, if I click to bridge replacement, it switches me to the bridge replacement folder, and there I've got that file there. If I try to pick one of these other default Montana DOT ones, it'll say, oh, that path doesn't exist. You could use those and use those projects and make individual paths for those if you'd like, but do it by discipline. But a lot of places like to actually have the project name here reflect the actual project they're working on. So either way is fine. But now you've got to customize this, put it out on a network drive. You've separated the DGN files out by project, and you've oops, didn't do something right there. Separate out the DGN file by project. You separate out the user preferences, so everybody has their own user preference folder and their own user config file. Okay, so just a couple edits to that configuration, that startup configuration file, and you can move things around and configure this as you need to. All right. Back to that startup config. So this startup config is set to run instead of the MS local config that runs when MicroStation runs, and you have to use it with an icon, a startup icon on your desktop or some other place. But you have to launch MicroStation or GeoPack with a custom icon, custom shortcut. Some of you may have want to run MicroStation or GeoPack and always have the Montana DOT settings and workspace settings resources available no matter how you start MicroStation. Well, that's why I set up these other two that you could easily set up, and with again a couple changes, make it real easy. So there's two config files for that. The startup all is just a variation of this one, where we've taken out the MS-dir and the include here at the beginning, and then the include at the end. Like I said, if you start this from an icon, you have to replace what the mslocal.cfg file uses that comes delivered with MicroStation or GeoPack. In this method, we don't have to replace that, so we can get rid of these lines that set up what the mslocal did. So we comment those two lines out, and then this last file is just a simple include that's going to say include this file that I just made. And this file goes to your product application folder. So if I click and hit copy on this, this would go to your program file. Oops, wrong folder. Program files x86, Bentley, and depending on what you're running, Power GeoPack, MicroStation, or GeoPack on top of MicroStation. I'm going to put it in Power GeoPack, but the location would be the same, either Power GeoPack or MicroStation. Config system, and then if you put it here at the end, oh, again, I'm coming from that network drive, so it's not going to let me paste it directly to that system folder, so I have to put it on my desktop and then I can move it in there. All right, so any config file in this folder gets run when MicroStation launches, or in this case, Power GeoPack. So when it hits this file, it says include this file or read all your Montana DOT config standards. So no matter how they start MicroStation, or in this case Power GeoPack, whether it was the custom icon or with just by double-clicking design file, they will then get the options to use the personal and then the resources off the network then. And the reason we only put one line in this file is, some of you have IT staffs that take care of the installation, and you're locked from adding files to this folder. So if you just give your IT staff, when they make the installation, it's just that one line file, so everything's going to be read from there. So if there's any changes to the workspace or the configuration files, you don't have to come in and change this file. This will pick up any of the files that change automatically. So you have to bother your IT staff once to put that file out there and make it maybe part of your standard install. All right, so that's sort of a quick overview of how we've set this up and how you can go through and make changes here. And like I mentioned before, you will have probably next week we'll have the download available, so you can download and unzip this and test out for yourself. And then again, I know I went through some of that, and if you're not some of that quickly, and if you're not familiar with setting up MicroStation standards and stuff, that might have been a little too deep into the coding for you, but the instructions will have how you can set that up, illustrated instructions. So I guess at this point, if you have any questions, type those in, and we will answer those.
Thanks, Rod. Thaddeus, anything you want to add in?
If there are any additional questions that consultants have or improvements that are desired, again, Jen Jewett would be the person to contact, and we will consider any comments that you have.
Good deal. Yeah, and like Rod said, this is going to be rolled out here shortly. The goal for MDT is to make this consultant workspace a quarterly release, so that as MDT makes improvements internally, they'll turn around those updates to the consultants on a quarterly basis. Again, that being the goal, this is our first rollout, so again, our goal is to roll this out in maybe late October with any changes that MDT has made internally, so that you guys can see those changes at the same time. So yeah, so with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'm waiting for maybe a question to pop through on the conversation. So I'm just going to stretch this out a little bit longer if somebody's still typing right now. But if there are no questions, thank you for attending. This meeting was recorded. It will be made available, as was yesterday's too. So will be a follow-up email on where you can see the message or see the meeting online, probably YouTube. Oh, we do have somebody typing right now, I see. So I'm just going to hang on here for a second. Okay, well, you're welcome. Thank you, Jake. So yeah, hopefully it is as simple as it looks here. I do think the PDF instructions are going to help, whether you guys want the workspace to be local or server based. So yeah, thank you everybody, and stay in touch.